The first thing I noticed was the smell. That is a strange detail, I know. I am a Vethani, and my species perceives electromagnetic radiation the way your kind perceives color. I do not smell in the chemical sense. But the Vethani have a word, thalver, which translates imperfectly as the wrongness a system radiates before it breaks. Engineers use it, station commanders use it. I had used it myself 14 times in 31 years of service, each time in the minutes before a catastrophic failure. When the signal came in, I smelled thalver so strongly, my secondary eyelids flinched shut. I am Coordinator Sale Orvan, Senior Traffic Officer for the Yun Meridian Relay Station, appointed to this post after 3 decades of service across 6 jurisdictions. I have managed the deorbiting of a dead colony ship with 11,000 people aboard. I have rerouted fuel tanker convoys through active debris storms. I have issued quarantine orders on vessels carrying 12 different kinds of hemorrhagic fever, and watched the faces of those captains through the glass as I signed the forms. I have seen everything this corridor of space has to offer. I had never seen a signal like this one. It came in at 04:17 station time during the quietest watch rotation. My junior analyst, a young Fendari named Kiev, picked it up first. The Fendari are a smaller species, covered in short copper-colored fur that stands on end when they are alarmed. Kiev's fur was fully erect when he brought the reading to my console. "Coordinator," he said, and his voice had that careful, deliberate flatness the young use when they are very frightened and trying to appear otherwise. "There is a carrier frequency coming from grid sector OMU 7. I cannot identify the protocol." I looked at the waveform. Then I looked again. "Run the archival index," I told him. The index took 8 seconds. 8 seconds is a long time on a busy watch. The match it returned was 912 years old. The Tesavai beacon, one of 4 placed by the Tesavai convocation before their civilization collapsed in what historians now call the Quiet Extinction. The Tesavai had been, by most accounts, a mid-tier spacefaring species, unremarkable except for 2 things: their navigational mathematics, which were extraordinarily precise, and their beacon network, which they seeded throughout contested gravitational corridors as a public good. The beacons were built to last. Clearly, they had. What they were not built to do was reactivate on their own after 9 centuries of silence. "Someone has triggered it," I said. Kiev's fur raised further. I did not know that was anatomically possible. "Triggered it from inside." I pulled up the telemetry. Grid sector OMU 7 was not empty space. It was the gravitic shear zone of the Valayan binary, 2 stars locked in a decaying orbital dance that generated tidal forces capable of crumpling a mid-class freighter like paper. Nothing flew through OMU 7. Nothing had flown through OMU 7 for 130 years since the Galactic Route Authority declared it a navigation exclusion zone. The beacon was inside the shear zone. So was whatever had triggered it. I opened a channel to every vessel within relay range. Protocol required it. The beacon format was a distress designation, Class 1, which meant life support compromise, crew in immediate danger, time critical response required. 17 ships received the broadcast. 16 responded with silence or with politely worded declinations citing the exclusion zone boundary and their insurance riders, or with questions about whether the signal was even real given its age, or with requests for clarification, or with offers to forward the data to the appropriate rescue authority, which, as I reminded them through gritted teeth, was me, and I was broadcasting because I needed someone to physically go in there. The 17th response came 4 minutes later. Meridian Relay. This is the independent cargo hauler, Sable Margin, registry number HT4 Bravo. I'm reading your broadcast. I'm also reading your exclusion zone. You want me to go in, or are you asking for volunteers in the abstract? The voice was human, female, Flat affect, the way some of them get when they are concentrating hard and choose to perform calm instead of feeling it. I checked the vessel registry. The Sable Margin was a Class 4 bulk hauler, the kind used for moving raw ore or grain between outer colony depots. Its pilot of record was one Nora Vasquez Chow, licensed hauler, 8 years of independent operation, home port listed as the Kepler 7 asteroid belt settlements. The manifest showed she was carrying 60 tons of machine parts bound for the Dantis Station agricultural expansion. She was a grocery delivery driver, essentially, in space. Sable Margin, I said, and I will confess that I chose my words carefully because I was not certain what I was asking her to do was survivable. The beacon is approximately 4.3 kilometers inside the shear boundary. Our instruments suggest it was triggered manually from inside. There may be a living individual or individuals aboard whatever vessel is in there. We do not know the vessel type, the crew manifest, or the condition of the life support system. A pause. And none of the other 17 ships want to go. No. Another pause. Shorter this time. What's the tidal gradient at the boundary? Fluctuating between 0.8 and 1.4 standard gravitic units per kilometer. A sound that was almost but not quite a laugh. Well, that's a gradient, all right. Okay, I'll need you to patch me the beacon's exact coordinates and give me a 12-minute window to prep my compensators. And, coordinator? Yes. If this turns out to be nothing and I survive, I would like the exclusion zone transit logged as a forced detour for my delivery window. My client is particular about late fees. Kiv turned and looked at me. His fur had gone very still. I realized I did not know what to say. What followed defied explanation. I had pulled the Sable Margin's full flight history while she was prepping. Standard procedure, and I will be honest, also a form of due diligence because I wanted to know whether I was sending a competent pilot into a death zone or simply the nearest warm body willing to go. The history was, on its surface, unimpressive. Cargo runs, depot-to-depot transfers, 3 minor incident reports, 2 of which were paperwork disputes about docking fees. But there was a note buried in her early records, before the hauler license, before the cargo routes. Nora Vasquez Chow had spent 4 years racing in the Kepler Belt Circuit, which was not a sanctioned racing league because no sanctioning body had ever been willing to ensure it. The Kepler Belt Circuit involved modified short-range shuttles flown through the navigational nightmare of a densely packed asteroid field at speeds that made most species' hands shake just reading the telemetry. She had won it twice. I did not fully understand the significance of that until I watched her fly. She took the Sable Margin into the shear zone at 0.3 light speed relative. Most pilots entering a gravitic gradient of that intensity would have slowed to a crawl and navigated by instrument, making careful corrections. Vasquez Chow did not navigate by instrument in any way I could recognize. She was making adjustments at a rate my console flagged as anomalous, 47 micro-corrections in the first 90 seconds, each one timed to the leading edge of a tidal pulse, using the shear itself as a kind of propulsive medium, surfing the gradient the way a vessel surfs a solar sail wind. How is she doing that? Kiv whispered. He was gripping the edge of my console. I had not told him to. I did not tell him to let go. She grew up in the asteroid belt, I said. She learned to feel gravitational variance before she learned anything else. She's reading the field manually. I think she is reading it the way you read a room when you walk into it, not as data, as sensation. Short sentences now, because what she was doing happened fast. The tidal pulse spiked. She rolled. The compensators screamed. She corrected. She was 3 kilometers in. 2.5. 2. The beacon signal sharpened. The vessel inside was now visible on deep scan, Tesserae hull design. 900 years old, completely intact, which meant, impossibly, it was still pressurized. 1 kilometer in, the shear spiked to 2.1 units per kilometer, nearly double the rated maximum for her hull class. The sable margin structural integrity alarm went active. I could hear it over the open channel, a rapid low tone. I heard Vasquez Chow say quietly, "Yeah, I hear you." Not to me. To the ship. She rolled the hauler onto its side. Then she did something I had never seen a pilot do under power. She cut the main engines entirely and used attitude thrusters only, spinning the vessel on its axis in a controlled flat rotation, using the angular momentum to carry her through the peak of the tidal spike without fighting it at all. The alarm stopped. She came out the other side 300 meters from the Tessavai beacon ship, drifting at a rate that was, against all mathematics, precisely correct. "Got visual," she said. "Hull's intact. There's a light in one of the ports. Whoever's in there is alive." Kiv made a sound. I do not have a word for it. He sat down on the floor, not in a chair, on the floor, and pressed his copper-furred face into his hands. I let him. I will tell you about the quiet moment, because it is the one I think about now, weeks later, when I lie awake in my quarters at 04 RI and watch the binary stars trace their slow spiral through the viewport. The vessel was a Tessavai long-range survey ship, a design called the Tralix class. They had been used 9 centuries ago to chart gravitational corridors and place the beacon network. This one had been on a routine survey run when the quiet extinction began, a slow catastrophe of ecological collapse and resource failure that took the Tessavai civilization apart over 3 generations. The crew of this particular vessel had never made it home. The ship had drifted into the shear zone and been held there by the gravitic forces in a kind of accidental preservation, sealed in its own time. 900 years of stasis had kept one passenger alive. One. She was young. That was the first thing Vasquez Chow told me when she got through the airlock. Young by Tessavai standards, which meant she appeared to be roughly the human equivalent of 12 or 13. She was tall, pale-skinned, with the large secondary eyes of her species, and she was sitting in the back of the survey vessel's main cabin, wrapped in what had once been a crew jacket that was now more patches than original fabric, holding a data tablet that had long since lost its charge. Her name, as best Vasquez Chow could render it, was something like Vel. She had been awake for the last 7 hours. She had woken to failing life support, found the beacon, and activated it manually after consulting the ship's 9-century-old instruction manual, which she could barely read because the script was an archaic variant of her own language. She was alone. She had been alone for, as far as anyone can determine, a very long time. The stasis records were partially corrupted. We do not know how long. What we know is this. When Vasquez Chow came through the airlock, Vel flinched back against the wall. She had never seen a human before. Nothing in her cultural memory would have prepared her for what one looked like. "Hey," Vasquez Chow said, and her voice on the recording is something I have listened to more times than I can count, because there is a quality in it that I do not have the right word for. Gentle is too small, steady is close. But what it really is certain. Certain in the way someone is certain when they decide, without negotiating with themselves, that another living thing matters. "You're okay. I've got you." Vel did not speak Galactic Standard. Vasquez Chow did not speak Tessavai. They did not need to. She sat down on the floor, not standing over the girl, on the floor at her level. She held out her hand, palm up, an offering, not a demand. Vel looked at it for a long time. Then she put her hand in it. The next 14 hours were agony for me, in a purely professional sense. Getting the sable margin and the Tessavai survey vessel out of the shear zone with a fragile 900-year-old hull in tow required the kind of physics I had not thought about since my certification exams. Vasquez Chow managed it by tethering the survey ship at a precise angle to use the sable margin's mass as a counterweight to the tidal forces, and then essentially walking them both out at a pace so slow the instruments barely registered it. 7 hours. 7 hours of the most precise low-thrust piloting I have ever witnessed. At one point, I asked her how she was managing it, not professionally. I just needed to know. "I used to do this with asteroids," she said. "When you're working the belt and you need to move a big rock without breaking it, you don't push. You escort. You go at its speed and you make tiny adjustments and you let it find its own path." You are comparing a 900-year-old alien vessel to a rock. "With great affection," she said. They cleared the shear boundary at 19:04 station time. I had been on duty for 15 hours. I did not notice. Within hours, the news had propagated through the relay network. By the next day, the HFY Historical Preservation Society, a small academic organization based out of Terminus Station, had filed 17 separate requests for access to the vessel. The Galactic Route Authority had issued a provisional citation for unauthorized exclusion zone transit, and then, 3 hours later, quietly withdrawn it. The Dantis Station Agricultural Expansion Project had received an explanation for their delivery delay that I personally dictated to their logistics coordinator, and which I made very clear was not subject to late fee assessment. Within the week, 3 different political bodies were arguing about the jurisdictional status of a 900-year-old HFY vessel and its single surviving passenger, a child who was, technically, a citizen of a civilization that no longer existed. The Fendari Interstellar Congress, to their considerable credit, cut through the argument in 4 hours by doing something no one had expected. They offered Vel provisional citizenship under the clause their legal system uses for stateless individuals recovered from pre-extinction vessels. It was a clause that had never been used before because no one had ever found one. There was a ceremony. Small, because Vel was overwhelmed by crowds, and Vasquez Chow, who had been asked to attend as the recovery pilot, had used the word ceremony in a tone that suggested she would rather be doing almost anything else. I attended as station representative. It was the first time I had seen Vasquez Chow in person, out of the audio channel, out of the telemetry readout. She was shorter than I expected. Humans often are. She had the look of someone who had slept badly on purpose for a long time because sleeping well required a kind of peace she was not used to. She wore the standard hauler's vest with the collar up, and she was eating a protein packet from her own pocket during the diplomatic preamble, which made the Fendari lead consul's aide visibly distressed. When the consul addressed her formally, thanking her on behalf of the Fendari people for her role in the recovery of a living HFY citizen, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I just went in and got her," she said. "Vel did the hard part. She woke up in a dead ship alone and she kept her head and she activated the beacon correctly. I just drove." I watched the consul's aide, a young Fendari female barely out of her training year, standing to the side with a data pad she had forgotten to look at. She was staring at Vasquez Chow with an expression I recognized because I had seen it in Kiev's face during the flight. That particular kind of quiet attention that means someone is watching a person and thinking, without words, "I want to be like that." That is the moment, I think. Not the flight, not the tidal gradient, not the physics of it. That young aide standing there doing the math on what it meant, measuring the distance between who she was and who she might become. I have tried, in the weeks since, to write a formal commendation for the record. Station protocol requires it for any pilot involved in a Class 1 rescue operation. I have started the document 11 times. The problem is the standard commendation language. It uses words like heroic and exceptional and above and beyond the expectations of the role. None of those words fit. Not because they are too strong, because they point in the wrong direction. Vasquez Chow did not do something exceptional. She did something that was, to her, ordinary. She looked at a problem that every other pilot in relay range had evaluated as unsurvivable, and she filed it under inconvenient but manageable. She went in because someone was in there and she was close enough to go. She came out because she was skilled enough to. The extraordinary part was simply that she was in range when the signal came. That is what keeps me awake, not what she did. But the implication of what she did. 31 years of service, 6 jurisdictions. I have worked with Fendari pilots, with Vethani navigators, with the Grau-N, who have 4 processing cores and can run navigation solutions in parallel streams. I have watched species that evolved in binary star systems and species that have been spacefaring for 10,000 years. I had never thought, not once, to wonder what the human cargo hauler was doing in the next sector over. They were delivering grain, they were fixing equipment, they were running routes that more prestigious species considered beneath them. They were out there, in every corridor, every exclusion zone border, every dusty transit lane between here and the outer rim, doing the unglamorous work. And they had grown up, all of them, in environments that the rest of the galaxy considered hostile. Asteroid belts, high radiation colony ships, gravitic anomaly zones where their early, underfunded settlements had no choice but to adapt. What else are they capable of? I do not ask this with excitement. I ask it the way you ask a question when the answer already makes your secondary eyelids flinch. I saw Kiv, 3 weeks later, enrolling in an emergency response certification course. He did not mention Vasquez Chow. He did not have to. I saw Vel twice after the ceremony. She was placed with a temporary Fendari academic family who specialized in historical linguistics and had, apparently, a gift for making a 900-year-old traumatized child feel like the most interesting person in any room. She was learning Galactic Standard. She was teaching them archaic HFY. On my second visit, she was sitting at a kitchen table doing something with a data tablet, and she looked up when I came in, and for a moment, her large secondary eyes held that same wariness I had seen in the airlock recording. Then she smiled. Slowly. The way someone smiles when they are not yet sure that smiling is always safe, but they have decided to try it anyway. I thought about Vasquez Chow's hand, palm up, on the floor of a 900-year-old ship. An offering, not a demand. I realized something that has kept me awake for weeks afterward. The Sable Margin was scheduled out of our station the morning after the ceremony. I had her departure logged. 60 tons of machine parts rerouted successfully to Dantis Station after the delay, no late fees applied. The next manifest listed ore, 12 tons, bound for a depot in Sector Fen 4. She had moved on. She was already somewhere else, doing the quiet, unglamorous work, flying the routes no one else wanted, waiting for the next thing that needed to be done. By the next day, she was 3 sectors away. Within the week, I had not heard her name from anyone except Kiv, who mentioned once, carefully, that he had looked up the Kepler Belt circuit standings and was considering whether his vacation time could be spent in the asteroid settlements. I told him to go. Then I went back to my console and I looked out at grid sector Omu 7, which was quiet now, just starlight and tidal forces and the slow death spiral of the binary, and I thought about the other beacons. The Tessevae placed 4 of them. We found 1. I thought about what happens when the other 3 activate. I thought about what happens if there are other corridors, other signals, other old ships in exclusion zones, and no one is close enough to answer, except the species that has made a way of life out of going places everyone else has decided are not worth the trouble. I thought about what they have learned out there in all that hostile space that we left to them, what they have become, what they are still becoming. The Fendari consul at the ceremony had said something I found myself returning to. She had spoken about the gift of being found, about what it meant for a lost child to have someone answer. She had meant it about Vel. But I had watched Vasquez Chow's face during that speech and seen something in it I could not name at the time. I can name it now. Recognition. As if she knew what it was to be in an exclusion zone with failing life support, sending out a signal, and waiting to see if anyone close enough was willing to come. We had looked at a species living on the margins of explored space, taking the routes no one wanted, driving the machines no one valued, and we had called it limitation. We had welcomed wolves and told ourselves they were strays, and handed them the routes that led everywhere, and now they knew every corridor we did not.